If we're talking basketball, there's really only one country that comes to mind: the USA. Home of the NBA, NCAA, and with a rich history of basketball throughout the country, spanning over a century. But what if we told you that there was another region in the world that's been producing NBA talent for decades, and as of recent, is even giving the top-level Americans a run for their money? A place where players such as Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, Jusuf Nurkic, and many other NBA players with the name ending in "ich" come from: Yugoslavia. And while this isn't a country anymore, breaking up into a bunch of smaller countries in 1991 due to some conflicts that we can't really talk about on this channel, the collection of countries that formerly made up Yugoslavia are still pumping out high-level NBA talent like it's going out of style, with 86 total players from this region coming to the NBA all time, which firmly ranks second for number of international players in the NBA. Impressive numbers for a region of around 20 million people, or around 6% of the population of America. There are 14 notable players from this region who are playing right now, which ranks third in total NBA players, where besides the USA, it's only being beaten out by Canada, the closest nation to the USA culturally, and where the person who invented the sport was from. When grouped together like they would have been 30 years ago, they firmly beat out so-called international basketball powerhouses France, Spain, and Italy, by a pretty big margin when it comes to number of players in the NBA, and frankly the skill of the players as well. And this is nothing new. Yugoslavia, or the countries that formed it, have been performing at a top level internationally for decades now, most notably in the Olympics, with multiple top 3 finishes and even a gold in 1980, as well as 3 gold and 3 silver medals in FIBA. Even today, with this now fractured basketball-loving people being separated into countries mostly having a smaller population than New York City, countries like Slovenia, Serbia, and Croatia are always making a splash in international basketball, and proving that the breakup of Yugoslavia was not only a huge blow to communist legitimacy worldwide, but way more importantly to this channel, was a tragedy the international basketball community will never recover from. So what exactly are these countries now, and what NBA players come from them? Well, when the dust settled after Yugoslavia's breakup, it led to 7 separate countries being formed, being Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, and Kosovo. And before we get to the hot takes, we'll do a quick dive into the region to show you all of the current players and some notable historical players. Starting with the most populous of the former Yugoslav nations, Serbia currently has 5 notable players in the NBA, the most notable one being Nikola Jokic. You might have heard of his name, with him being a 2-time MVP and leading the crippled Denver Nuggets to the playoffs year after year with insane stats while playing like a 40-year-old dad at the park. Jokic is definitely the best player of the entire region at the moment, putting up 27 points, 14 rebounds, and 8 assists per game in the 2022 season. He's seemingly able to take over any game and threaten basically any team if he's feeling it that night. So, strong start for Serbia. This is followed up by Boban Marjanovic, everyone's favorite 7'4" lumbering giant, who's been doing a good job of trying to break into the show business industry. And while he barely gets 5 minutes per game, he's a legend out there on the court when he does get the playing time, legitimately being one of the best per 36 players in the game. He'll fly out there for 5 minutes and get you 7 points, 5 boards, 2 assists, and a block somehow. He's just a tiny bit too big for the game to play major minutes these days. But hey, drop him in the 80s, and he might have actually been a big deal. And rounding it out, you have the man you thought was 24 years old but is actually 30, Bogdan Bogdanovic of the Atlanta Hawks, and a promising young player in Aleksej Pokusevski, who could actually have a late breakout, Pascal Siakam style. Oh, and who could forget about the attempted identity thief Nikola Jovic, who, jokes aside, looks like he has some potential in him, drafted to the Heat this year. This is a lot of talent for a small country in Europe, and it isn't even mentioning the historical players to come from this country, the most noteworthy ones being Vlade Divac and Peja Stojakovic, or the historical success of the Serbian men's basketball team, winning 2 silvers at the Olympics and 2 golds in FIBA. Moving on to the next most relevant country in basketball these days, Slovenia. This little mountain country only has 2.1 million people, which might be less than your home city. Yet this country has 3 players in the NBA right now, meaning that if you come from Slovenia, you actually have a higher chance to make an NBA roster than if you were born in America. And getting it out of the way right now, this is the home of Luka Doncic, the man rocking the basketball world right now despite looking like a 7-Eleven employee and smoking cigarettes before games in true Eastern European fashion. Luka, ever since he came into the league, has been out for blood, having the best season by a 20-year-old ever, and talking smack the whole way through until the present day, where he's going into his 5th season, and looks like he might take the jump to really contend for best player in the NBA anytime in the next few years. His potential alone puts Slovenia on the map, but there are 2 other players in Vlatko Kankar and the Toronto Raptors' worst nightmare, Goran Dragic, who's getting old now but is a good player when locked in on a team he actually likes. On the historical side, Sasha Vujacic, Kobe's old teammate who won 2 rings with him, had a pretty mid-career but also comes from Slovenia. The final major basketball country from this region is Croatia. Notable players from here include the other Bogdanovic, Dario Saric, and Ivica Zubac, who are all decent players in their own right. But while Croatia doesn't have any true stars at the moment coming from it, the historical impact of Croatian basketball has been huge. First off, Drazen Petrovic, who as a 20-point per game scorer on the Nets during the early 90s, was a true trailblazer for international basketball and a legend in the region. Sadly, he tragically died in a car crash in Germany when he was only 28, right in the prime of his career. He was known as someone with the balls to stand up to MJ when trash talking, and as a truly skilled player with much more to show, as he only had a few seasons under his belt in the NBA. Another historical player from Croatia is Toni Kukoc, a 3-time champion next to MJ, and while clearly Kukoc wasn't even the 3rd biggest name on this team, he pulled his weight and contributed to championships. Croatia has also performed pretty well internationally in the past for its relatively small population, earning a silver medal in the 1992 Olympic Games. The rest of the countries don't have as deep of a basketball roster, but still produce some impressive players. Jusuf Nurkic from Bosnia has struggled with injuries sadly, but when he's playing, he's a borderline star. Nikola Vucevic from Montenegro isn't really a big name, but the guy can score, putting up multiple 20-point per game seasons. And how could we forget about LeBron's old teammate, Cedi Osman from Macedonia, who's doing his thing on Cleveland still, I guess. With all of these good players from the region playing in the NBA today, and even historically, it's tough not to wonder how Yugoslavia would do internationally, especially given all of the international basketball going on right now in the offseason. This leads us to ask, how good would a modern-day Yugoslavian national team be? And how would it stack up against the kings of basketball, the USA?
When looking at the NBA through its inception up until today, the league has seen a major international shift. As in the early days of the league, with America being the birthplace of the sport and the Premier League being in America, it's no surprise that it was mostly American-born players that were dominating the league through those days. So it would also be no surprise that since basketball's entrance into the Olympic Games in 1936, America has only lost 4 out of the possible 20 gold medal games, and one of those years was only because the games were held in Moscow at the height of the Cold War. But Yugoslavia was always right there as well as a top contending team for Olympic basketball. But when looking back on those early teams, the rosters may seem pretty underwhelming to American viewers, as we were never really exposed to players like that. Even former New Jersey net Drazen Petrovic, who was on the Yugoslavia bronze medal team in 1984, never ended up making it over to the NBA for another 5 years. However, in 1988, the roster starts to look a little more familiar to NBA fans, with players such as Toni Kukoc and Vlade Divac joining the national team. But of course, in another 3 years, Yugoslavia would break up, causing that talented national team to also break apart, with players joining their own respective national teams, which you can still see lingering around in medal positions, with Croatia taking home the silver medal only 2 years following the split up of Yugoslavia. But with all of that being said, it brings into question what the 2024 Yugoslavia team would look like in an alternate reality where the separation never occurred. And the answer is, the team looks pretty incredible. We'll start by looking at the guards coming off the bench. At the 1 spot, there's NBA veteran and legend Goran Dragic. And backup shooting guard could potentially be Kliman Prepelic, who was drafted in 2019 by the Sacramento Kings, while also being the starting shooting guard for the Slovenian national team, who's proven to be a great shooter in his own right, having a field goal percentage of 63%, being a 34% shooter from 3, and knocking down 95% of his shots from the charity stripe. Looking at the wings now, there's a heavy selection of NBA proven players, starting with small forward Cedi Osman, who averaged 11, 2, and 2 for the Cavs last season, and looking like a very solid role player for a young squad. Next player coming off the bench would be Nemanja Bjelica, who's a bench player for the Warriors, and also was a contributing factor in them winning a championship this season. And then there's Dario Saric, who's managed to carve himself out a successful 6-year career playing in the NBA. And finishing out the wings, they could potentially choose 5th overall pick in the 2015 draft and former NBA player Mario Hezonja. Although Mario didn't live up to the hype in the NBA many people placed upon him, he's been able to have a pretty decent career in the EuroLeagues, which is a benefit, considering the Olympic Games is more played around European-style basketball and rules, rather than the high-paced, flashy style of American leagues. Looking at the backup centers, there are 3 solid NBA players, starting with Jusuf Nurkic of the Trailblazers, Zubac of the LA Clippers, and John Wick's most feared enemy in Boban Marjanovic. Now for the starting lineup that could even give the USA men's team a run for their money. The main 2 stars, Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic, on a team together kinda give off white boy / fundamental Shaq and Kobe vibes. Then at the 2 spot would be Bojan Bogdanovic, which is not to be confused with the stud from the Hawks, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who would also be available to start at the small forward position. Next would be hammer-jawed Nikola Vucevic, who despite being born in Switzerland, identifies and plays for the Montenegro national team. With a starting lineup consisting of 2 potential top 15 players when their careers are finished, being surrounded by excellent NBA-proven talent, and playing in the Olympics where the rules force the game to look more like one they grew up with rather than what the American players grew up with. It's hard to see how this team wouldn't make things tight going into the 4th quarter. So with the team being established, we might as well go straight into the hot takes that are sure to get this comment section lit afire. The potential Yugoslavia team would potentially beat the USA men's team in 2028, but would definitely beat the 2024 USA men's basketball team. Looking at the 2020 Olympics, it was clear to many fans that the world was catching up to the USA, as the Americans seemed to struggle at the beginning of the games, losing to France by 7, then having tough games against Spain where they seemed to struggle. Although America never ended up playing any of the teams that were part of the former Yugoslavia, it wouldn't be a true test of competition anyways, as Serbia is the most team constructed of NBA talent, and that team only consists of Bogdan, Jokic, Bjelica, and Boban. And when America did play them in 2016, Serbia made it a very interesting game, with America winning 94-91, only a 3-point victory. And this was before Jokic nabbed his back-to-back MVPs, and now with Luka set to head into his prime. Although looking like he's already been in his prime since entering the league, imagining this team in 2024, they could look seriously scary, especially considering the fact by that time, the star of the USA national team, Kevin Durant, would be 35 years old. Now in this hypothetical alternate reality, Yugoslavia beating the USA team could be a result very similar to the 2004 USA men's team, where the league was in a transition period with future stars being too young to make a real difference, and the current All-Stars looking more at Larry O'Brien's rather than gold medals, as this period seems to be happening in the NBA with American players currently. The starting lineup of this hypothetical team is only set to get better as the years go on, so it wouldn't be impossible to say this team would be a thorn in America's side even if another formation of the Redeem team came along. But all we can do as fans is speculate, as this will never truly happen. And with that being said, that's all for this upload. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. And also subscribe to the channel to never miss another one of our uploads, and we'll see you on the next video.